16 months before Floridians make history by electing count 'em, five new statewide leaders, a new Sachs Mason-Dixon poll shows this: nothing is decided. And while Governor Charlie Crist enjoys a comfortable lead for the GOP nomination and in the general election for the U.S. Senate, his rival, former House Speaker Marco Rubio, enjoys some comfortable progress. We'll talk about the 2010 political sweepstakes in Florida with our guest, the brilliant political strategist Sally Bradshaw, a Republican, and the equally brilliant Screven Watson, the Democrat. Okay, the Mason-Dixon Sachs poll shows that in the U.S. Senate race, Governor Charlie Crist has these leads in a primary matchup against former Speaker Rubio and against either Democrat so far. But let's pull the veil back on the numbers. What do you really see, Sally?
Well, the news out of the Sachs Mason-Dixon poll is that there's essentially no new news out of the Sachs Mason-Dixon poll. This is a very consistent poll with what we saw a month ago, both in the Senate race and in the governor's race. In the Senate race, Governor Crist enjoys a commanding lead still over either potential Democrat opponent and over Marco Rubio, his primary opponent. What's interesting in that primary race, obviously, is that Rubio is not as well known as the governor. He's known by about 50% of Republican voters. And when you tested Crist and Rubio among Republican voters, they are in a dead heat. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
So does the governor have trouble here, Screven?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think on the governor's numbers dropped a little bit and his negatives went up, but we also saw McCollum's negatives go up. We saw Sink's negatives go up. What it tells me is the Floridians, the voters right now, are a little peeved at elected officials. And if you did a right direction, wrong direction question, I think you would see people feeling like maybe the state's going in a wrong direction and they're blaming everybody.
Well, but we just ended a fundraising quarter, and for either Democrat who hopes to run against Charlie Crist or Marco Rubio, and for Rubio, the challenge is plentiful to raise a lot of money.
No question. I mean, the quarter ends, today, and I think that's the next campaign for all these races, the Senate race, the governor's race, and the down ballot is who's raising the money, how much are they raising, are they outdistancing their opponents? That's really the next campaign we see is tomorrow and as they report.
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road for all of these candidates, and particularly on the Republican side, you have an interesting contest because Rubio has to raise money to be competitive with Crist in the long run. But he doesn't have to raise the same amount of money as Governor Crist. Everyone expects Crist to do extremely well. He's an incredible fundraiser, and we expect him to do what he's always done. The question is, where does Rubio end up? But does he need as much as Charlie Crist? And probably not.
So how important potentially is a debate in the Republican primary for Marco Rubio?
Well, it could be very important because obviously his positions on issues are different from Governor Crist in some areas that matter to Republican voters. But ultimately, it is a long shot for Rubio. I mean, this is a very difficult contest for him, and given the end of the fundraising quarter, you know, we'll be able to judge a little bit better how competitive he's going to be.
My guess is, by the way, Crist doesn't let Rubio within 10 miles of him on the debate trail. I mean, I don't think you're going to see a lot of debates.
There'll be a lot of pressure near the primary election itself. Let's go to the governor's race, where it's an open seat for the first time in a long time, an incumbent walking away from the job, and the polls seem to be holding constant here. Bill McCollum with a lead outside the margin of error over CFO Sink. How do you see it?
It's Sally said earlier, I think it's the same we saw in May. The numbers haven't moved at all. I think it's a 6-point lead for McCollum, but if you look at it, I'm going to be a broken record here, Sally. People know McCollum. He's run 20-something times, 13 times. 13% of the people, only 13% didn't know him, where with her it was 50%. So I'm going to be a broken record here. Nobody knows Sink. Some of the women, there's only a 2-point margin. Half the people probably think Alex Sink's a man. So, I mean, as we get longer into this, I think what we're going to find is those numbers are going to change. But right now, people are reacting to the name Bill McCollum because he's a professional politician, where Sink, they just don't know as well.
It's not exactly accurate to say no one knows Alex Sink. 60+% of the voters know Alex Sink. 80+% of the voters know Bill McCollum. They're both in the same boat. I mean, they've run statewide, but they haven't run for governor. They haven't run for the U.S. Senate. And again, in addition to maintaining a solid 6 percentage point lead, which is what we saw last month in Mason-Dixon, we've seen it in Rasmussen recently. He is carrying independents handily. He is carrying more Democrats than she is carrying Republicans. He's dead even among women. So there's continue to be some really strong signs for Bill McCollum in this race.
And what about Republican Senator Paula Dockery or this largely unknown Michael Arth? Their names appearing as possible contenders for respective nominations. Any factor at all?
I don't think it's a factor. If anything, on the Republican side, it shows that McCollum really is the choice of Republicans. Republicans are increasingly comfortable with Bill McCollum as their choice for the nominee. He destroys her in a primary head-to-head, and so I don't think she's a factor.
Even though I did find it interesting when you polled just the Republicans in that Dockery matchup, 50% of the people on McCollum were neutral. They didn't have him favorable and unfavorable. They just had him ranked neutral. So
Well,
I didn't
but
think that was a great sign.
He's beating her handily and obviously maintaining a lead among all voters, which we saw last month. So if you had a choice between being Paula Dockery, Alex Zink, or Bill McCollum in these matchups, you'd want to be Bill McCollum.
Oh, I'd want to be Alex Zink.
Okay, I'll get back to you both on that. Let's go to the Attorney General's race, where we've got interesting fields here with announced and unannounced candidates. On the Democrat side, it's all bunched up, and if former State Senator Rod Smith gets in, he kind of vaults to the head of a very tight pack.
Yeah, I mean, again, Ron, it's 66% were undecided. That is really, these down ballot races are going to be about money. I mean, I hate to say it, you know, the endorsements are important in some level, but the further you get down this ballot, it's going to be about who raises the money, who runs a lean, mean campaign, communicates with the voters in a way that's effective. That's what this race is about.
Well, Sally, if Lieutenant Governor Jeff Kottkamp gets in on the Republican side of AG, the poll shows that basically he's not got a big number right now.
Well, I'd agree with Screven that it is very early in these down ballot races. Most, if not all, of these candidates are complete unknowns in anything beyond the governor's race, the U.S. Senate race. I don't think Kottkamp will be the only Republican, to emerge in the AG race. In fact, a new name is circulating this week, Holly Benson, who is Governor Crist's secretary at the Agency for Healthcare Administration. She's been his secretary for business and professional regulation, and also a legislator from Pensacola. She is a University of Florida educated attorney. She's a bright, articulate young woman, and a lot of people are looking to her as a potential opponent for Kottkamp in that race. And with legislative and executive experience, she could be formidable.
Well, finally, let's go to the CFO race, where really the only name you can talk about much here is Senate President Jeff Atwater. How's he doing?
He's doing well for this point in the race. Again, as we said, it is very early. The primary is in August of 2010, more than a year away, with the general election in November. Again, Screven mentioned the first primary, and that's really fundraising. And so those who are better known, like Atwater, who served as Senate President, will probably do better in bringing in funds to get themselves known statewide. And I think fundraising is very important to all these candidates down the ballot.
Absolutely.
Screven, we're seeing a lot of national interest, media-wise and in the political circles, in everything going on in Florida in these statewide races. Why is Florida so interesting to the rest of the country?
Well, I mean, a lot of it, Ron, goes back to the 2000 vote, where people just look to Florida now, what's going on in that crazy state. But I mean, really, it's so important in presidential politics. It's so important in the count of the U.S. Senate, whether the Dems can get to 60, hold 60, or above 60. And of course, the Dems had some pickups here last year in the House. So it's one of those, like California and Texas, one of those bellwether states that people look to see how, if there's any shift going on that people could read across the country.
And Sally, in light of the Obama victory and winning Florida, are we going to see any kind of change in the legislative makeup next year, a majority switch from Republican to Democrat? Any chance at all?
I would be surprised. I mean, certainly Florida is a competitive state for Democrats, as they proved with the Obama campaign. You have to remember, Democrats outnumber Republicans in the state. They hold at least a 6 percentage point advantage on registration, and yet we were able to hold the legislature at a time when Obama won Florida. And these numbers in the Sachs Mason-Dixon poll show you that in a state where there's probably a wrong track environment, we still see Republicans leading in all the top races.
Although you look good in blue.
Next time I have to wear red.
If you like.
Grab me for a second, Ron.
Screven, a final thought?
Well, again, I think this is, as Sally started out saying, these numbers are probably, as we move through kind of the doldrums of the summer in 09, are probably going to see the same as we move into the fall and winter of next year. I think you'll start seeing whether some of these candidates are getting traction, both on the financial end and the political end.
Well, I want to thank you, Sally Bradshaw and Screven Watson. We'll be back with another Mason-Dixon line the next time there's a reason to go on the field with a new poll or there's some major development. Hope all your candidates are gaining steam. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.